Welcome everyone. I'm Sudhir Pandey and I welcome you to Ahmedabad University. This is the famous conversation series from Amrit Modi School of Management. And today we have two eminent people here. You might have seen Professor G. Molin Unni previously as well. But we have today Dr. Pranav Sen on a very important topic that concerns all of us. So I would like to begin the proceedings today. It is my pleasure to introduce such an eminent speaker, and I'm very excited to have you, sir, on the panel. Dr. Pranav Sen is the program director for the IGC India program. He received his PhD in economics from the John Hopkins University, specializing in open economy and macroeconomic systems, international economy, and public finance. Most recently, he was the principal advisor Power and Energy at the Government of India's Planning Commission. He has also had positions at the first statistician of India, acting as the functional and technical head of the National Statistical System in India, as well as Secretary, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, Government of India from 2007 to 2010. As a representative of the Planning Commission, he was principal author and coordinator of midterm appraisal of 8th, 9th, 10th, and 5-year plan. Currently, he heads the Standing Committee on Economic Statistics of India. This committee's job is to review, deliberate, and develop methodologies for surveys on industry, services, and employment in place of multiple panels on these issues. And we are privileged to have you, sir. Welcome to Ahmedabad University. The person who will be in conversation with Dr. Sen is Professor G. Molunni. She is a professor of economics at Amrit Modi School of Management, Ahmedabad University. Before joining Ahmedabad University, she was the director of Indian Institute of Rural Management, Anand, IRMA, and RBI chair professor of economics at IRMA. She holds a PhD in economics and MPhil in applied economics. She was a postdoctoral fellow at Economic Growth Center, Yale University. She is currently a member of the Standing Committee on Economic Statistics, of which Dr. Sen is the chair. So both are in the same committee. Uh, she is chairperson of subcommittee on labor force and time use survey. She was an international labor organization ILO consultant and senior advisor to the National Commission for Enterprises in the unorganized sector, Government of India. She is currently on the board of governors and of several educational institutions in India. She is on the editorial board of the Indian Journal of Labor Economics and the Journal of Development Policy and Practice. Without further delay, I'm very excited to have you both on the panel, and I request you to begin the conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you, Sudhir.
Good evening, everyone, and good evening, Dr. Sen.
Good
So let
evening.
me add my welcome to Sudhir, to our university and to this conversation series. And we could not have found a better person to tell us what is the economy and what we could possibly do to come out of this situation that we are in, and how are the institutions operating with regard to this. So without any delay, I think we will start the questions and the conversation. So given your interest and my interest, we'll first focus a little bit on the current situation of statistics, because it's also part of one of our major institutions that we should be worrying about, our statistical institutions. So as the former chief statistician and currently the chair of the Standing Committee on Economic Statistics, can you briefly tell us what is the controversy with regard to estimates of the gross domestic product, the GDP? In 2015, the Ministry of Statistics put out this new series with 2011-12 as the base year. But then they also introduced a new methodology, which is something that they do regularly. They've done it in 2004-5 before that, as we know. But then they also introduced a new methodology, and they included data from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, the MCA 21 database on corporate enterprises, which earlier they were getting out of the RBI series. Recently the NSSO survey on service sector. Now that's a new one that we have. We never had a survey on service sector, including the corporates. We have a informal sector, service sector surveys. So the service sectors, when they went about doing that, they discovered that about 38% of the so-called firms in the MCA database were untraceable. So Is this both the the change in definitions, the new data being added, and the fact of what we have just discovered? How does this affect the GDP? Can you tell us something about what is this controversy really with regard to GDP?
Well, now this is where the problem crops up. Um, I think a large part of the controversy has to do with habits and what you're used to. Now, if you think about the way GDP was computed in India earlier,
Right.
it used to be based essentially on using surveys, a lot of surveys, in fact, to estimate the base year absolute figures. From then on out, it was assumed that the productivity, that which is the value added per physical unit, would remain constant, and therefore the growth rate of any sector would be measured by the growth in the physical units. Now, this had a fairly serious problem, and that problem really had to do with two things. First is that this method does not take into account the improvements in productivity that may take place, where the value added per unit may actually be going up. The second problem is it doesn't take into account quality. So if you think of a situation where, let's take Maruti as an example, Maruti's bestseller used to be the 800 or later the Alto, but gradually that has been shifting to higher grade cars, and therefore the GDP per unit has actually gone up. So Asha says she can't hear me. Can the rest of you hear me?
Yeah, you could speak a little closer to your microphone.
Yeah. Okay, let me just adjust the camera a bit. All right. Okay. Now, the one way to capture the full growth is to really use balance sheet.
Right.
And that's what we are trying to do. So earlier, balance sheet data was used for the corporate sector, but that was based on a very small sample of about 2,500 companies that the RBI used to maintain. What is being done now is that the full database on all registered companies, which comes to a little over 7 lakhs, are being used. So if you simply think about it in terms of coverage, there is absolutely no question we are covering it better.
Yeah.
The real question that I think there are two issues that crop up. The first is a methodological one, which is earlier it was assumed that the unorganized sector or the unregistered sector would behave more or less similarly in terms of physical growth as the corporate sector. What is being assumed now is that the value addition growth of the unorganized sector will behave in the same manner as the value addition growth in the corporate sector.
Yeah.
This is a problematic assumption.
Yeah.
And quite obviously, you've worked on the unorganized sector a lot more than I have. It's a seriously problematic assumption.
Right.
The second problem is that if you're actually capturing improvements in quality rather than productivity, right? What is happening? And if you're presuming that quality improvements are taking place, then your price deflators are not picking that up.
Yeah.
Because the price deflator is backward looking.
Yeah.
Right? So what's happening there is that the price deflator actually overstates the GDP a little bit.
Right.
So these are really the two problems. But if you think about it a little more carefully, as far as the estimate of nominal GDP is concerned, this method is far, far superior to what we are doing earlier. The problem is on real GDP.
Real GDP, yeah.
Yeah, that's where the whole fight really boils down. And I'm delighted to see that Devaki Jain has joined us.
Yes. So
Welcome.
yeah, I also welcome Devaki Jain for joining us. Many others here, I think Indira Hirve and many people have joined us. So I leave the methodological conversation to people who want to ask the question, and my questions I'll ask you later. So we will move on.
Your questions you can ask me in committee.
Yes, definitely, but we are not the GDP committee.
That's right.
So, all right. So, coming to the delays in the arrival of estimates of both GDP and employment estimates, to what extent does that affect the planning of the government? And the employment figures of the MOSP is, of course, delayed. But then what is happening there is that we have these private sources now, the Center for Management, CMI, Management of the Indian Economy. They have this consumer household pyramids data. Now, a lot of people are using that because they are getting that data on a monthly basis. So you can do a lot more econometric stuff, and you can see things moving on real time almost. And you can see them making their announcements, and then a lot of work is being done on that. I have also used that, and I have seen a lot of I've seen a lot of holes there in that data set. But what do you think? Would you like to comment on the CMI data sets, or?
Well, I'll come to that. I mean, it's not just CMI. There are a lot of high frequency data that's being used.
Yes.
Things like the Google data on mobility and stuff like that. So there's a lot of high frequency data that's being used essentially because official data is not coming in at a frequency that would be desired. And that's perfectly understandable. I mean, people almost have to make decisions real time. But again, if you go back and think about our data systems were really built for planning. They were not designed to address real-time policy issues. Now, under normal circumstances, our data sets are perfectly adequate. So if you're talking about the general trends in fiscal and monetary policy, our data sets are fine. But when you're talking about a crisis, you really want relatively real-time data. And our systems simply don't provide that. And that's why people are looking for all these other indicators. Now, the problem with the other indicators is that you have absolutely no idea about the extent to which they can be generalized. They are measuring very specific things, and you can draw a statistical link with the GDP series or the manufacturing series or whatever it is that you wish to do. But you don't really know whether those relationships are tight enough to reflect crisis situation like we are facing now. Right? That's number one. Number two, again, if you think about it, and this is something we've discussed, Jimo, if you want higher frequency data, particularly in a situation where you have no choice but to go through a survey methodology, which is what CMI is doing, for instance, with the labor statistics and the expenditure pattern information, the consumer pyramids data. That can only be done if you're using a panel, which is that you have a fixed set of respondents who you are approaching on a regular basis. Right? Now, panels have one problem, which is the problem with panels is that when you create a panel, it's usually representative. But then as time passes, that sample becomes less and less and less representative, and we have no real way of figuring out how unrepresentative it has become. Right? So the reliability of the data decreases over time. But the basic learning from there is that, look, if and as we are finding out now, that if data is indeed needed for real-time policy, the official system will also have to move at least partially towards a panel-based system, right? Now, how we can do that, how quickly we can do that, how efficiently we can do that is something that we will see in the future. That's things we are working on at the moment. But I don't think there is a choice but to do that. You cannot do quick data if you're going to be using pure cross-sectional data collection methods. And so there is a problem. And I think the important thing is that, I've been at this game for a long time. I've been at it for 40 years. The demand for data from the government has changed.
Right.
Earlier, policies were made by finance ministry and a whole range of other ministries without really resorting to data at all. Almost all of it was gut feeling, seat of the pant. Right? Now, policymakers are demanding data, which I think is a huge step forward. And once that happens, I think the data system will respond, and hopefully in the future we'll be better off than we are today.
Yes, very much. We see that in our committee because every time we're getting new demands from different sectors of the government asking for new data sets or retabulation of various types of the data that we've already collected and so on. One last question with regard to data sets, it's to do with enterprise data. Because a few days ago, I read in the newspapers that the Labor Bureau, which used to collect this quarterly employment survey, which is data on enterprises, in 2016, I think when we started the periodic labor force survey, that data was stopped. They stopped collecting that data set. So they used to collect it from some 15,000 establishments in 8 sectors of the economy. So now they've come up with this thing. They're going to restart that quarterly employment surveys and increase their database to 75,000 enterprises. And then they're going to choose, the second part is what worries me more. And they're also going to take enterprises from the informal sector. So what do you think of this? And, basically the arriving at employment using enterprise sector data and then using these informal enterprises survey as well.
Bimal, in the Indian context, you cannot use enterprise data to estimate overall levels of employment, unemployment. It is simply not possible because 80% of your labor force is in unorganized enterprises who the labor ministry is not going to be reaching out to. They are really talking about formal enterprises. Right? Having said that, what you said was correct. The Labor Bureau data was stopped when PLFS was started, saying that you're going to have 2 data sets. I had opposed that actually, saying that this is not right. For the very simple reason, the 2 data sets are giving you 2 different kinds of information. To believe that the PLFS can substitute for the enterprise employment data is simply wrong, because the enterprise data is going to give you information on the kind of jobs that we aspire to, not the kind of jobs we do, but what we aspire to. And it gives you that data at a granularity. No survey, no household survey can do, which is where we collect our PLFS data from. So the PLFS data is from the point of view of the worker or the potential worker. And the labor force survey is from the point of view of those who are employed in formal enterprises in the country. 2 very different data sets should be used for different purposes. And if anybody makes the mistake of using the Labor Bureau data to estimate unemployment, he or she should be shot.
All right. So, okay, now to come to the current economic situation, we have been seeing some of your write-ups and also your interviews with other channels and so on. So we saw that in the earlier quarter, the manufacturing sector had collapsed, and that's a huge collapse. And then recently, in the quarter two, there is a slight increase, and everyone is cheering from the side for that. So, in a more general sense, what has changed considerably in the Indian economy since the pandemic that may be responsible for these kind of twists and turns? And or is it just that, okay, now the economy has hit rock bottom, nothing else can happen, we're going to swing upwards?
Well, we will certainly swing upwards from the rock bottom. The question is, will this be like a steady upward movement, or will it be a little bit of a yo-yo movement going up and down? That really is the question. And, I don't think people fully, and I think, Jimal, it's largely your fault and mine. We are teachers of economics.
Mm-hmm.
And when we teach, we make the cardinal mistake of sort of behaving as if everything could happen instantaneously. We know as practitioners that that is not true. There are long leads and lags in the way different parts of the economy react. Some parts react very quickly, some parts take a long time to change. Now, it's in the recognition of these frictions that we start getting a sense of how the economy is likely to behave. So if you are doing our conventional kind of economics, once you've started the upward trajectory, you will just go on forever on it. Right? But that's not true. All sorts of things start coming into the way. I mean, let me give you an example, for instance. The shift that we've seen, the massive increase that we've seen from quarter one to quarter two, is mainly the outcome of unlocking of what was essentially a supply side constraint. Right? That constraint isn't fully over yet. It's mostly over, but not fully over. There are still parts of the system which are locked out. Okay, most places, particularly in urban India, have declared various activities should remain closed. So the supply side problem hasn't gone away in its entirety. But what you're now starting to see and will continue to see in the next couple of years is really the consumption story playing out.
Right.
Now, as far as the consumption story is concerned, it's actually quite interesting. If you look at the 2 quarters data that have been released, what you will find is that in quarter one, the private consumption expenditure was higher than private incomes. So there was a massive saving that took place in quarter one. In quarter two, that's been corrected. That is now, there is some private savings, but it doesn't look large enough to offset the savings that has taken place earlier.
Right.
So what that means is that as people start rebuilding their savings, consumption is going to grow very slowly. And this is what's going to hold you up. This is what is called the multiplier process. And the multiplier process has been set back by a couple of quarters. But it's going to play out as people start rebuilding their own balance sheets. Okay? So that's one. Now, this is happening relatively quickly. There is another lead or a lag problem, actually, which is going to hit us next year. And that is investments.
Yeah.
At the moment, again, in quarter two, you've seen investments go up. Not a whole lot, but it's gone up. And my suspicion is it will continue to go up a little bit. But these are investments which were in the pipeline before the lockdown happened. And once lockdown was lifted, the company started to bring those investments back, and they're probably starting to try and accelerate the pace at which those investments happen. The real question is that are new investment intentions coming into play? Because what's happening is the pipeline had a certain amount of projects in it. Those projects are now going to come out of the pipeline. If new projects haven't come in the beginning, then sometime, which is about 3 to 4 quarters down the line, you will find that the pipeline is getting empty. And that is my big fear. My big fear is that it's in Q2 of next year that you're going to find that we may have gotten over the consumption story, because by then, hopefully, the savings build-up would have been completed, but we'll be hit with the investment story. Unless we see credible evidence of new investments coming up. Now, as far as the corroborative data we have is concerned, we see none. Bank lending is up a little bit, but in terms of the term lending of banks, nothing. Term lending of banks are flat. Most of it is working capital, right? Look at the stock market. Stock market is going great guns. This is the time when IPO should be coming into the market. There's no sign of an IPO anywhere. Right? So clearly, new investment intentions are not being worked on at the moment. When they will get worked on, and then when will they be acted upon, becomes the huge question mark. And my submission is that this is going to play out in the following financial year. And it can actually shock you much worse than the consumption story that we are seeing today.
Okay, so now that we've come to investment, so now the government has brought in a number of stimulus packages. Now, what has that done to us? And the private sector, as you're saying, is not quite in the mood to invest. So in that case, don't you think that the role of the government to jack up the economy is higher? I mean, just simple, say, Keynesian economics. So what do you think the government should be doing to invest more and sort of maybe jack up animal spirits or private enterprise?
No, the government. Now, let's break it up in parts. When the supply side was locked up, right? Yeah. Public investments would have served no purpose. Public expenditures, by and large, would have served no purpose other than expenditure which were directed towards the really poor and those who had lost their jobs. But that is humanitarian. That is not an economic package.
That's for investment.
That's a humanitarian package, right? But after the lockdown was lifted, and once you know that there is going to be a problem on the consumption side because of this huge reduction in savings that has taken place, the government should have stepped in. It really hasn't. Well, again, let me correct myself. Here we are, our topic is institutions.
Yes.
What we have is a situation is that in the first and second quarters of this year, and maybe a part of the third quarter, the state governments have been spending much more than they did last year, much more. So the state governments have been propping up the demand. The problem, of course, is that the state governments are going to be running out of money within the third quarter.
Right.
And in the fourth quarter, the state governments collectively will have to reduce their expenditures sharply. Okay?
Right.
This has two implications. The first implication has to do with the disease management. COVID still doesn't show any sign of going away, right? And the entire brunt of disease control and disease management has been borne by the state
government. Yeah.
Now, if state governments run out of money, and they can't borrow more because they need central government permission to do so. In the fourth quarter, if COVID is still around, disease management itself is going to be a huge, huge issue. So you may well have a situation where even simple things like testing get curtailed. Yes, it is quite scary, actually. All of those things are being done by states. So that's implication one. Implication two is that when the states cut back, the government as a collective entity will be adding to the demand compression,
Mm.
okay, over and above the consumption story that we've been talking about, which will make the contraction even worse unless the central government steps up
Right.
and not only increases what it has been doing, it increases it sufficiently to make up for the reduction in state government expenditures. Okay? So there is a big if out there.
Mm.
So the central government may step it up, certainly, but will it step it up enough? That's number one. That's the first part of the story, as it were. The second part of the story really has to do with investment. Now, clearly, there is a huge role of government in reviving the investment story. But I think that role is a little nuanced. It's a little more than just spending a large amount now. I think one can be a lot more strategic about it. I mean, for instance, uh, we keep talking about public investment, which is the best way of doing things. The question is public investment where?
Right.
Right? Because we are still not such an integrated economy that public investment in place A is going to have a multiplier effect in place B. It doesn't work. Hmm? So it has to be much geographically better thought. That's number one. Number two is that if you think about private investment, and let's face facts, even before COVID had started, government investment was less than a quarter of total investment in the country. It's private investment which really drives our economy. Now, revival of private investment, again, does depend upon government action, but it depends more upon a notion of sustained government action. So for the government to announce that I'm going to do a large package today and I'm going to stop next year is not going to help. Because an investor has a time horizon of at least 2 to 3 years, which is the time it takes for his investment to mature. So the government has to give assurance over, to my mind, the minimum should be a 3-year fiscal plan, not an 8-year fiscal plan at all. A 3-year fiscal plan which gives investors sufficient confidence to be able to enter the market and say, okay, I'm going to now start investing.
Yes, so it's not a here today, gone tomorrow kind of situation is not going to help us as far as the private sector is concerned. So if we are optimistic and we think that the economy is going to revive, which sectors do you think will revive? Is it the financial sector or is it the construction sector? Or any other?
As far as the construction sector is concerned, it's a slightly problematic. The construction sector has revived quite strongly,
Right.
even in the absence of other investment. And but if you look at the data a little more carefully, it seems to be mostly rural driven. So a lot of rural construction is taking place. Now, why that's happening, how that's happening, I'm not very sure.
Okay.
Okay. But I suspect that that would taper off quite quickly. So the construction sector is heavily dependent upon infrastructure,
Right.
but which means that it depends both on public investment, which is faltering. State governments have to cut down on their public on their investments, and the center isn't doing very much anyway. So the immediate future for the construction industry doesn't look all that great. I think a lot of what you're seeing is what I call the pipeline investments. Those are being taken to conclusion, and it's being done very fast. But where are the new projects to sustain construction? That really...
Isn't a large part of the construction industry's investment government infrastructure investment?
Yeah. It
If
is.
that is the case, then can that not be used as part? Of course, geographic, all that is still a problem. Uh, is that picking up the government infrastructure?
No, because what has happened is that the state governments, in order to finance their disease management costs,
Oh,
are actually reducing infrastructure
okay.
expenditures. So if you take a total government, like center plus states, it's probably going down rather than up.
Okay. Okay, so now to come to the fiscal part of the story. So this year, the government has allowed the states to sort of violate the limits of the fiscal responsibility budget management FRBM. But then in September 2020, in the 15th Finance Commission, NK chairman, the NK Singh, had raised interest was saying that they recommend, or he would suggest a kind of fiscal deficit target. I mean, a target range rather than a fiscal deficit. But then when our finance minister announced the budget of 2021, she fixed the fiscal deficit at 3.5% of GDP. Do you think that this idea of fiscal target range or some other option should continue next year, or else do you think, or what else do you think can be done with regard to the fiscal part of the story?
I'm glad you asked this question, Vimal, because this is something that has been worrying me terribly. The reason it worries me is that as far as the 2021 budget is concerned, right, the government tried to stay within the FRBM limits.
Yeah,
So they announced a 3.5% fiscal deficit for the center, and I think 2.7 for the states.
yeah.
I think that was the figure, which is well within the targets. Good. What happened was subsequent to the budget being presented.
Mm-hmm.
So these were factors which were beyond the control of the government. And so what we are going to see almost certainly, however it plays out, whether the government increases its expenditure or not, in any case, the central deficit is not going to be less than 5.5%,
Mm-hmm.
may even be more if it
Mm-hmm.
increases expenditures. And the state governments will be closer to 5%. So what we are looking at is a combined fiscal deficit somewhere at around 11%, okay, at the minimum, and it can be worse than that. In fact, my opinion is that it should be worse than that, but that's a separate story. That's it.
Correct.
Okay, but even if there is no additional spending by government, simply because of the reduction in tax receipts, you are going to see the fiscal
Yeah.
deficit plus the
Correct.
combined fiscal deficit at over 11%. So that's fine. I mean, I think the world will forgive us for that, simply because they know that these were factors beyond our control. Next budget, you have no such excuse. Right? When you present the next budget, you have to be able to take a call whether we will stick to the FRBM or we will violate it. And this will have to be publicly announced. The point is, what the Finance Commission says is only an advisory. Remember, NK Singh also chaired the FRBM committee.
Okay.
The current FRBM Act is based on the NK Singh committee report. All right?
Yeah, yeah.
So what the Finance Commission says is only advisory so far as the fiscal limits are concerned. But the FRBM is an act. Now, whether the government will come out and say that given the extraordinary situation that we have been through and the extraordinary situation that is likely to prevail for this year and maybe even the next, we are holding the FRBM Act in abeyance, and we are determining our fiscal action accordingly. If the government doesn't say that, then what you may be looking at is a situation where next year may be worse than this year.
Hmm.
Because what you will have then is the government budget acting as a depressing influence on the Indian economy.
Right.
And that is quite scary.
Right. We've spoken about the state government, and we can see that the state government is pretty stout for funds. But I want to ask you this: that how much of this can be, taken care of by the center paying up what they're supposed to pay, like for the states, for example, the GST we talk about a lot. But is that fraction so little at it's not going to save the state government in any
Well,
fashion?
you see, the big one, the center has already reneged upon,
Right.
which is the contractual transfer that was supposed to have been made. So the
Correct.
states were then
Yes.
then pushed to borrowing that money.
Correct.
That's already happened. Okay, but that at least was accompanied by an additional 0.5% that the states could borrow. All right. The regular GST payments
Yes.
uh, will not be accompanied by that kind of a measure. And therefore, if those are held up, and by the way, Jimol, I'm less worried about the GST transfers.
Hmm.
I am much more worried about the transfers that happen from ministries under various central schemes, because the states are the implementing organizations for most of the schemes that you can think of. But the money comes from the center. If that money doesn't flow,
Oh.
and the message that we seem to be getting is that other than 13 departments of government, the remaining, and there are some 60 plus of them,
Hmm.
have had to take serious cuts in their budget.
Hmm.
Serious cuts, 20-30% cuts. So it means that the funds flow that used to happen through central government and the centrally sponsored schemes may
Yeah.
not be happening and may not happen in the future.
Right. So, okay, so other than the GST, the CSS, the central schemes is also now a source of worry, because that's one thing that was actually maybe reaching some people.
It was.
Yeah, exactly. So that, the demand part of, then your demand side is also affected by the fact that this is not reaching the people anymore. All right. So now, other than these, what we've spoken about now, what other kind of policy initiatives do you think that this center or the states need to take in order to help revive the economy? And other than the center, state, and the financial institutions and other institutions, what kind of role can they play in the state of affairs that we are seeing now? And what should the private sector be doing? I mean, they also have a role to play. I mean, the fact that they are not investing, we can see. But what other policy initiatives do you think should be taken?
You see, as far as the other policy initiatives, I think the single most important is to take a close, hard look at what is happening in the financial sector. Okay? In the finance, because again, unless policy initiatives are taken fairly quickly, you might find the financial sector acting as a major drag. The reason is that what has happened up to now is that the government has permitted the financial sector to essentially hide all the bad news. So
Right.
all the NPAs that should have occurred from the end of March to now have all been kept under wraps. And this is fine. Not recognizing the NPA in the sense that you don't actually take that particular borrower to bankruptcy is okay, because we don't know how much of it was because of the pandemic and how much of it was coming essentially out of the unwillingness of the borrower to repay. So I'm not objecting to that. What I am objecting to is that you're not taking into account in terms of the bank's own provisioning for bad loans,
Mhm.
because you're not recognizing them as bad loans to begin with. So what is likely to happen is that the day when this restriction is lifted, the banks are going to be saddled with a huge amount of bad loans against which they're going to have to do provisioning. Now, when they do provisioning, and provisioning happens from the bank's own reserves and capital, which basically means that the bank's ability to lend will get seriously reduced, because the banks cannot lend more than a particular multiple of their capital. That's the CRAR. So that's going to get reduced. And so even if private investment comes back, the financial sector may not be able to provide their services. So this is one area where the government has to step in, and I think it should step in reasonably quickly, at least give the banker. Today, the banks are all very scared. They know what the problem is. All the bankers I talk with are
Yeah.
worried. The government has to come in and say, we know what your problem is. We have created a part of this problem for you, and we will backstop you when the time comes. So don't go worry and go ahead and lend as you would normally do so. I think this should be absolutely on the top of people's minds. And you're right, the private sector certainly has a role to play.
Yeah.
The problem, of course, is that a large chunk of the private sector is actually seeing this situation as an opportunity.
Mhm.
And they are using, so a large number of companies which were otherwise very competitive, because of what has happened, have lost their competitiveness a bit. The labor has gone away and so on and so forth. Other companies are actually taking advantage of that and trying to push them out of business so that they get that market share. Right? So what can well end up happening is, by the time all of this clears up, we may have lost a lot of our productive capacity, essentially because of predatory behavior within the private sector itself. Now, to ask the private sector to behave itself and not act selfishly, I think is not going to get us very far. The question then is, what can the government do about it? And frankly, not very much, unless uh, there are, if my memory is right, some provisions in the Competition Act which could address, large gains in market share. And if this can be established, then the government may be able to do something about it and say that, look, we'll crack down if you guys don't behave yourself.
That's right. But we know that they didn't do anything when the Geo operated in the first round
Oh, no, they didn't.
and in any other round. So we can't be sure about the Competition Commission. Yeah, it has the teeth, but then they don't use it.
Yes.
All right. So to come to the institutions of dealing with statistics and the financial institution, do you think these are, given the kind of story that we've been listening to now, do you think they have been compromised? And do you think that we need some kind of more checks and balances to keep these institutions functional? And if so, what do you suggest? I'm not going to the courts and things like that. But
No, at the moment, I don't think they've been compromised, which is why there has been far more resort to suppression rather than any other form. So I think in terms of the integrity, they have held up. But the pressure, I think, is there. And I think demoralization is happening. Now, if demoralization happens, it doesn't necessarily compromise the integrity. But what demoralization does is it reduces the efficiency a great deal.
Absolutely. It reduces the enthusiasm with anybody who wants to do anything. I mean, we can see it in every institution. So one final question, I think we're getting a lot of questions on the chat, but I just wanted to ask something which is going on at this point in time. I'm not going to ask you directly about the farm bills. I think that's a whole new, a different story. What has been worrying me is that both agriculture and labor, since I'm a labor economist, are on the concurrent list. We know that. But both in terms of the recent farmer bills and the labor codes, uh, do you think the center is infringing on the rights of the states? I also saw recently a report saying that considering the labor codes, like I said, it's always a thing that I understand most. Uh, I saw this report which said that they are trying to, the center is now looking at all the state laws, labor laws, and trying to see how to, and ask them, request them, pressurize them, whatever it is, to bring it in line with the central codes. And they were talking about actually the Mathadi law, the head load workers law that we have in Maharashtra. But then, there are many such worker boards and so on in many other states, including in Kerala. So in that sense, do you think that the new system, the way it is working, it is kind of, you're the whole federal, I mean, there are a number of questions here about the federal system, but is this in some way infringing on the rights of the states?
Up to a point, yes, Jimal, I think it is. But one needs to be a little careful. This is less so for labor, more so for agriculture, because what is certainly very much within the domain of the center is interstate trade. And if the center feels that there are state laws which hamper interstate trade, then the center can actually step in and say that this is not on.
Okay.
Right? This is true in a lot of agricultural cases. So if you really look at what happens is that that Essential Commodities Act is used quite often for this purpose.
Right.
So I think there is some legitimacy, but only for anything that hampers interstate trade. Okay, the point is that it can be nobody's case that the traders who work in the APMC mandis are not undertaking interstate trade or hampering interstate trade in any manner. I don't think that can be anybody's case.
Right.
But at least I can see a locus standi. As far as labor is concerned, right? There are certain areas where the center does have absolute jurisdiction and should have, which is setting the labor codes, which is the basic labor standards, which are a part of your citizenship rights rather than labor rights. Okay, safe working environment and so on. But beyond that, almost everything else can and should be in the state's domain.
Right.
And I think the center is overreaching unless it simply says that, look, this is in a sense a model code.
Right.
And we would encourage you to adopt it. And then it's up to the states whether they do so or not.
Right. All right. So thank you very much, Dr. Sen. I think I will hand, because we've got a bunch of questions here. I'll hand over to Sudhir, who will go through I've not had this thing to go through the questions, and he will raise some questions which are coming from the chat box from the audience.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So there are a lot of questions, partly you have answered in your discussion, but there is a question by Professor Amol Agrawal, and he's saying that how do you assess the role of Finance Commission in dealing with slipping fiscal federalism between center and states? What can the Finance Commission do if center does not release the fund owed to states? Can Finance Commission tell the center and state to cooperate during these trying times?
Unfortunately, no. The Finance Commission, the constitutional provision, ceases to exist after it has submitted its report. Once it's given its report to the President of India, the Finance Commission ceases to exist. So it's not a standing body.
Mm.
And the kind of role that you're thinking about would require a standing body of some variety.
Yeah.
Okay. There was another related question to this. We talk about India's collaborative federalism, but I mean, they have not been, I just put up the question that they have not been able to pass the coronavirus test. So what was missing in that? Is it political problem or institutions were not made to cooperate in that manner?
No, I think, I may be wrong, but I don't think I am. I think a lot of other people share the same view that a hell of a lot of politics is being played out around Corona. I think that there are parts of the political system which see the Corona epidemic as an opportunity. I talked about the private sector, but I think that's much more so in the case of our political system. A lot of politics is being played. And in a sense, so it also relates to what we are talking about, fiscal federalism. A lot of politics is being played out in that. Again, taking advantage of the pressures that the coronavirus has put on the states. I think the center is taking advantage of that problem.
Uh, there is another question about the farm bill, and this is by Professor Sonal Yadav. She's asking that do you think that reforms in agriculture will help boost the economy? Why farmers are unhappy despite the fact that they can sell the produce anywhere to anyone? And that has been the question with all of us. So,
You see, the unhappiness of the farmers that you are seeing are essentially farmers who have had the benefit of public procurement. That is, these are farmers who could sell to the FCI. So where FCI presence exists. The other farmers couldn't care less,
Mhm.
right? But these people, it does matter a great deal. But even more than that, I don't think, there's nothing in the farm bill which says that FCI is going to wind up its operation.
Right.
Nothing says that. Okay. I think a lot of what the farmers are saying is we don't trust you.
Mhm.
You're going to have other agencies come and pick up grains now. FCI will be there, it's going to hang around, and then all of a sudden you're going to withdraw FCI. And then where will we be? Then we will be at the mercy of the private companies. I think what is being expressed now is a problem of trust rather than what's in the farm bill per se.
Mhm.
yeah, that satisfies, I think, most of us. There is a question by Lucky Pandey, and he's MA Economics student here. He's asking that the government scrapped the NSO's Consumer Expenditure Survey 2017-18. How this impact on estimating on poverty and inequality, and what was the reason behind not releasing the report?
I wish I knew. Look, we have no idea what the reason was. Um, what we do know is that the National Statistical Commission, which is supposed to be the final word on this issue, had approved release.
Yeah.
The release had been approved, but then it was suppressed, and an agency which simply had neither locus standi nor certainly the technical competence declared the report to be faulty. All right. So it's a complete violation of the institutions that have been laid down to make sure that the data is reliable and timely. And you have completely external and non-related entities who are meddling in this game.
Thank you. Uh, there is a question by Sridhar. He's saying that given that India has been an outlier among the governments across the world in terms of using a significant fiscal stimulus, the role seems to have been passed open to monetary policy, essentially by keeping liquidity available. How far is this sustainable as a strategy to revive the economy, especially when banks are unwilling to lend?
Well, first of all, yes, we are an outlier as far as fiscal policy is concerned. We certainly haven't done as much on the fiscal front as most other countries have, including our neighbors. But we are certainly not outliers in terms of monetary policy. Every country, whether has both had a large monetary stimulus as well as a fiscal stimulus. We've done just one. So the monetary part, what has been done was necessary. And I think the RBI has done an outstanding job within the constraints it faces. But the point is that monetary policy cannot substitute for fiscal policy. They have different roles. Monetary policy is at its most effective when you can actually act on investment intentions. But if investors are scared and are not willing to even look at the new projects, then no amount of monetary policy is going to help that. Their only fiscal policy can help. Right? What the second thing that the government has done is that it has made a lot of its sort of intervention contingent. So it's said that we will pay this if you do something. Now that's fair enough. But what that means is that the companies who are looking at these incentives must have the confidence to feel that they can do it. If the consumer isn't there, if the demand isn't there, I may produce whatever I like, but I'm not going to get my sales targets that the government asks for. So a lot of these contingent kinds of things the government has done, but most of this is still supply side. On the demand side, there has been absolutely nothing except what has been done by the states. And now the states have run out of steam.
Yeah, there is a question by a colleague, Saurabh Sarkar, and he's saying that it seems that a section of citizens have a strong appetite for stock market investment. For example, Sensex has recovered well above the pre-lockdown level, and every day it is rising.
Yeah.
Can good incentives be given to channelize this investment to beneficial investment?
How do you do it? You see, the stock market is the water, but you first have to have the horse that will drink the water, no? So if investors are not interested, you could have an overflowing lake and it still doesn't help. So the problem is really the investor confidence. That is, people who are going to make physical investments. The stock market will be able to provide them with, at the moment, with really low cost risk capital. But somebody has to take the risk first, no?
Yeah, Saurabh,
By the way, Saurabh, let me make another point. Please be a little careful on this, on the whole stock market issue, because it is also a reflection of what Jimal and I were discussing about some companies being able to take advantage of the situation to grab market share from others. A lot of that is getting reflected in the stock market. All right. If sometime those other companies start clawing their way back, then these companies may face pressures. We don't know whether it will happen. That will probably be sometime next year at the earliest.
yeah, thank you so much. There is a question that what will be the trajectory of GDP growth in the next 4 or 5 years? Is 5% prediction more optimistic estimate?
At the moment, I think almost any economist you speak with in India um, will say that India's potential growth rate is probably about 5% now. If you talk with the same economists pre-March, let's say you talk to them in February, they'd have all said 6%. If you had talked with them pre-November 2016, they would have all said plus 7%. Right? So it has been sequentially coming down. And yes, I think at the moment, 5% as the potential growth rate is probably not a bad estimate. The question, of course, is what do you take as the base year? Do you take 1920 as the base year to grow your 5%, or do you take 2021? They'll give you very, very different results.
Yeah, there is a question by a colleague, Professor Supratim. He's saying, would allowing corporate houses to set up financial institutions boost the expansion of credit?
You know, that is not very clear. In fact, today we have a situation because I think what he's talking about is this whole RBI paper on whether corporates should be allowed to set up banks. Think of what happens when a new bank comes into existence. The only way it can take off is by attracting deposits away from other banks. It cannot survive on just the incrementals. It has to poach. Now, if I have a situation where my existing banks are already in deep trouble and staring into even deeper trouble, what you may get with a new corporate bank coming in is a lot of our existing banks may simply not be able to survive. And the damage that would be caused thereby would be many times worse than whatever benefit you would get from the new bank and the new bank's lending. It will be much, much worse.
Okay. I think Supratim has got his answer. He's there on the screen. There is one question by Vinay, and he's saying that is issuing the municipal bond is good step to collect revenue by urban local bodies. What would be an improvement need for scale up that?
You see, municipal bonds are great, but you also need to understand that the real value of municipal bonds, uh, and this is the experience around the world, is when there is an active market in secondary trading in munis. Huh? The problem is a lot of our municipalities do have municipal. In fact, Gujarat is a front runner in issuance of municipal bonds, which is a very good thing. The problem is we have never bothered to create a secondary market. Now, if a secondary market exists, so if I sitting in Delhi said, look, Surat looks really good, I'm going to buy Surat bonds, then it helps a lot. But if you're telling the Surtis, ki bhai, you buy my bond,
Yeah.
and then whether I pay you or not, we will worry about it later. That becomes a little problematic because then the intrinsic link between the borrower and lender becomes, and what should I say, an asymmetric one. The borrower is much more powerful than the lender. So I don't think that's a great idea. So, but nevertheless, I think municipal bonds are absolutely the way to go. But somebody has to take responsibility for creating a secondary market. Unfortunately, if you again remember, the National Stock Exchange was originally set up to create a bond market in India for corporate bonds. All right, it gave it up. It's quietly shifted direction. But if we can actually get a secondary bond market in municipal bonds going, then that would be a fantastic step forward.
Thank you for this. There is a question by Varshita. She's saying that, do you think there is an effect on the technical recession of Indian economy by the import and export restrictions imposed with respect to our eastern neighbors?
I don't know actually. Um, there are certainly serious problems in very specific uh, sort of industries and products. But in a larger general sense, I don't think I have an answer yet.
Uh, Ma'am, would you like to invite someone to ask a question, or you're muted, right?
There's one more question by somebody called Esha. Is it
That,
Somil?
that is, yeah, Professor Saumil Shah.
Okay. He says, is it correct for the institutional optimism on the basis of quarterly data, some of which are imputations of missing data which are yet to be collected? Do you reckon that data may be significantly revised after either ways going forward, looking at some of the data showing this conflicting trend, the thing that I think was discussed?
No,
GDP,
you're absolutely right.
IP, IIP. Yeah.
Yeah, has been a lot of interpolation um, and imputations that have been done. The problem, of course, is I don't think we have any way of telling whether the missing data points are random or are they biased. And if so, even if they're biased, in which direction are they biased? I don't think we quite know that yet. And it could move either way. If it's random, of course, it doesn't really matter. It will be perfectly okay.
Yeah, one question that I have, and I mean, I know this is a very broad question, but I would like to ask, what prevents institutions to collaborate? That was the theme of our conversation. And what generally happens in India that when it comes to collaboration, they do not give that kind of result which is expected. Is it a structural problem, or it is
You know,
kind
so the collaboration almost always involves something which is larger than both of you. Hmm? Whenever you start looking at anything which is relatively small, then collaboration becomes very difficult because what you're doing is trying to get the whole pie rather than share the pie. So, in a sense, that's what we are seeing. So, if you think about, let's say, government institutions for at one level, state and center, if they're thinking in terms of the national well-being and national objectives, they would collaborate. If they're thinking about the politics of next elections, whether central or state, then the behavior is going to be very different. And this is true among private institutions as well. This is true again in academic institutions. Academic institutions frequently collaborate, but more often than not, they are busy trying to cut each other's throats. We know that. You're in one, I've been in one.
Right. That's a major problem that we have.
Yes, we do.
There's one more question, I think, though I'm not sure what that
Yes.
is.
It is by Sham Kakkad, and he's saying that what would Dr. Sen suggest to the current government to really work with the intent of spirit? Do you think that we need to repair our financial sector?
Yes, absolutely, sure. The financial sector at the moment is my worry number one. And if this is not addressed, what you are likely to see is that as the production sectors try to come out of um, this downturn, the financial sector is going to be your limiting factor. And that can be very, very damaging. So yes, absolutely. And up to now, I have not heard even a word out of government about the financial sector. Not a word.
So I think we can invite, would anybody like to ask? I think Sridhar, you're still here. Are you interested in asking directly Dr. Sen anything that's bothering you?
I think Professor Somil Shah has a question. He has
Yeah,
just,
Samal. Samal is muted. Are all these people muted, Sudhir?
yes, yeah, I muted them so they can unmute
I
themselves.
think, yeah, I think maybe Sridhar also you can unmute. Yeah, Samal.
You're still muted.
Yeah, now they're unmuted. Sridhar is there, so he can go ahead with the.
Uh, uh, this was a very nice, very interesting talk by Dr. Sen, as always. And no, I was just wondering whether these inflationary pressures, not just from food, but what we have seen, which the RBI has also mentioned in passing about. I mean, it didn't use that word, but I mean, basically, it said there is opportunistic pricing in several sectors of the economy happening. For example, in steel and the metals and various other places.
Yeah.
So, are these likely to, uh, weigh heavily on the continuance of an easy liquidity policy?
No, look, in any case, Sridhar, I think the high levels of liquidity have already outlasted its usefulness. It was essential at that time. Now one has to be a little bit more calibrated because there's no point in increasing liquidity in a situation where investment responses simply will not happen. So I think we need to wait for some credible evidence of that. There's already too much liquidity sloshing around the system, and it's creating, I think, a lot of problems, and it will create more problems in the future.
Yeah.
So I think the RBI is going to have to now walk a fairly narrow path. They're certainly not going to go into any kind of a correction mode. I mean, they should not.
Yeah.
But I don't. I think this over reliance on easy liquidity days are gone.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but those would again have an impact, which policymakers tend to watch very closely, stock market prices and so on. So, an unraveling of this may well be in order.
Well, you know, I unfortunately, Siddharth, correct me if I'm wrong. I am always very scared of the stock market, particularly when there's been a fairly heavy inflow of FII money.
Yeah.
Because there, my fear is if too many Indian investors get in, that's when the FIIs think that this is the time to book profits and get the hell out.
Yeah.
At which point, our fellows actually end up losing a lot.
Yeah.
And in a situation where overall incomes are already under stress, this kind of a capital loss by people in the stock market would be really quite terrible.
Yeah. 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 We are always the last suckers.
We are always the last suckers, always. Continue to be.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. If I come in, do you think that the personal consumption spending is sustainable? Looking at the banking data, which seems to indicate, it is being financed more out of indebtedness, personal indebtedness. Particularly alarming is the increase in the rise of unsecured credit. And do you think Canary saying yesterday in the governor's response to one of the largest credit card issuers in the country not being allowed to issue credit cards further, necessarily unsecured credit?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, you're absolutely right. So what is happening in effect, by the way, the banks have pretty much, as far as I'm aware, pretty much stopped giving consumer credit. A lot of it that is happening essentially through overdrafts and through credit card payments. That's how this debt is. Yes, but also, let me try and sort of play the devil's advocate on this, which is that when there's been this kind of loss of income, how quickly are you willing to change your lifestyle downwards? I suspect most of us would try to maintain our lifestyle as long as we possibly can, hoping that something will improve along the way. And I think that's what we are seeing. But we certainly don't want to get into a situation where then they dig themselves so deep into a hole that they can't climb back out again. Right? Which requires the civil kind of institutions to be far more active in terms of the credit rating of even individual borrowers.
Okay. Thanks for that response, sir.
Yeah. Ma'am, would you like to take any last question, or would you like to invite?
Yeah, if anyone else is interested, they are most welcome to ask. I think there's one question here which I didn't quite understand. Anua Chakravarti. With the real interest rates falling negative, what hope does a saver depositor have? Is there any possibility of the real interest rates going up in the near future?
Well, as far as the saver is concerned, the saver is in deep trouble. Okay? But the tragedy, Jimo, is that people are looking at the negative interest rate that savers are facing and then saying that what the hell is wrong with the investors because they're getting negative interest rates. They are not getting negative interest rates at all.
That's right.
The interest rate to a borrower today is a handsome 6% real interest rate, because you've got the WPI hanging around 1.5%, and the lending rates are all 7.5% plus. So the real interest rates on the investor side is high. On the saver side, it's negative. So we've got this gap which we have to close, and we have to close it fairly quickly.
All right. I think if there are, Pallavi. Professor Pallavi Vyas from Ahmedabad. Yeah, ask your question. Can you unmute? Sudhir, can you unmute Pallavi?
Yeah, she can unmute now. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sen. That was enthralling. I want, what about companies that have good credit ratings looking overseas for credit? Like, how viable is that?
It's frankly, it's pretty viable. There's absolutely, no real problem. And, Indian companies have actually been accessing credit from abroad at rates which would be better than the sovereign rates. And that continues to be true today. So if government of India actually went to borrow money abroad, it would probably pay 2.5 to 3%. But a lot of these private companies, good Indian private companies, can actually borrow at rates at a half of that. So yeah, so I don't think it's a bad thing. The only problem, of course, is the exchange risk. Right? Now, it makes sense for a company which has a major trade presence to borrow from abroad, because the exchange risk then not exactly, but kind of balances out. Right? But for companies which are totally domestically focused, they have to figure out what the exchange rate risk is going to be. And that may not be that attractive.
I see. So, and investors, supposing investors are looking to invest in a domestic company, they also have the same exchange risk issue, right? Like,
yes, they do. Yes, they do, except for, again, this is a lead lag kind of a thing. By our laws, right? If you have borrowed and your payment is due, you pay it now. You can't hang around. But if a foreign investor is coming and investing in India and makes handsome profits and sees that the exchange rate is not favorable, he or she can invest that money in India and sit on it till the exchange rate improves.
I see.
Right?
I see.
The Indian borrower doesn't have that option.
I see. Okay. Okay. So maybe the incentives, I think, need to be given to the local, local companies to be able to draw foreign investment. That seems to be,
Yeah, but if you think of what I've been saying, Pallavi, it sounds like a good place to go into collaborative arrangements, right? Because at the moment, the relationship
Right.
is symmetrical. So if you enter into collaborative arrangements, then you may be able to bring more symmetry into the game.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Any last comments, ma'am? Because our time is up. We have taken. Yeah.
Sure. So I think we will conclude now. And thank you very much, Professor Pranav Sen. I mean, you've explained things so simply and so lucidly that it's been a treat. So meet you at the next statistics
Yeah,
meeting.
next meeting. Although again, that will be virtual too, I take it.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Sudhir?
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And I think the question answer session has been really, really engaging. And we love the way you explain things. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. And thank you so much, Professor Jimol, for
Thank
organizing.
you, Preet, and thank you, Jimol, and thank you all for being here. I had a great time, enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yep.